Good morning. My name is Ligued. That's my Cherokee name, Keetoowah name. And my English name is Ernestine Berry. I'm director of the United Keetoowah Band Cultural Center and Museum in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. And I'm very glad to see you all this morning. And I want to just share with you a little bit about the United Keetoowah Band of Cherokees. A lot of people know or think they know a lot about the Cherokees, but there are very few people who really know very much about the United Keetoowah Band. So we're going to try to answer some questions that are commonly asked of me at the museum. Where did the name Keetoowah come from? Because everybody knows Cherokee, but they don't know Keetoowah. Who are the Keetoowahs? I get that question asked quite a bit. Are the Keetoowahs part of the Cherokee Nation? Why are there two Cherokee governments in Tahlequah? So I'll try to answer those questions for you. I'm going to try to go quickly because I have a number of slides here. It takes a while, but I'll try to go as quickly as I can through them. The Keetoowah people, that is the original name of the people is Keetoowah and Keetoowah, and they became known by a different name, which is Cherokee. There are other tribes also that got named. They're known by different names. The Muskogees are known as Creeks. The Navajos, their real name is Dene, and they're trying to reclaim that name now. So it's sort of the same thing here. We have Keetoowah people and we have Cherokees, but we're all the same people. We came from the same place, originated the same place. And actually, Cherokee is a foreign name. It has no meaning in the Cherokee language. The common name that the people called themselves was the Aniyawiya. Aniyawiya, that means real people. And that's kind of common among native tribes also. We're called the real people. Anikatuwagi, Aniyawiya, that means we are Keetoowah, we are the real people. The legend of the name came down to us from the Creator, according to our legend. There were 7 holy men who went to the mountain to pray, and they fasted for 7 days and nights. And on the 7th night, a messenger came to them and told them that God had compassion for them and that they would be called Anikatuwagi or Keetoowah. Also, the name is attached to the mother town, which is in North Carolina. The area where the old Keetoowah mound is was farmed for many years, for over 150 years, and it was plowed down, but there in the area you can see just a little rise where the mound was, and it is a burial mound. There are ancestors buried in that mound, but it still retained its name. Now there's 2 ways to spell Keetoowah, and generally the northern or the eastern Keetoowah spell the name K-I-T-U-W-A-H. In the west we spell it K-E-E-T-O-O-W-A-H. Even though it's spelled differently, it's the same thing. The Eastern Band bought the land back in 1969, and now it's declared to be a sacred area, and it very definitely is. So the name Keetoowah has endured for that length of time from, well, we say from before history, actually. So who were and who are the Keetoowahs? The Keetoowahs were historically the traditional and full-blood Cherokees. When the Europeans came, of course, there was a lot of turmoil in the society, and a lot of it was caused by intermarriage with the Europeans. The traditional and full-blood Cherokees decided that in order to maintain their traditional status and be able to practice their traditional ways, that they would move west because of all the turmoil that was created by the Europeans. So in the early 1800s, they began to seek a reservation in Arkansas. They did get that reservation. It's marked here on the slide. The northeastern part there is the White River, and on the southwestern part is the Arkansas River. So they held that territory for about 11 years. And then after that, the white people who had begun to move into the area, and also the Osages who already claimed that area, the Cherokees had battles with them, and also the Europeans who came in actually at gunpoint began to run those Indians out of their homes. And so they decided that they needed some help. They went to the federal government to ask for help. The federal government said, well, really not too much we can do about the white people coming in. What you need to do is just move a little bit farther west into Indian territory. So in 1817, they signed a treaty which relinquished the reservation in Arkansas, and they took land in Oklahoma, or the Indian Territory, as it was known of as at that time. Now, the Arkansas Reservation was almost in Indian Territory. It was on the western side of Arkansas. They had built their homes, established their farms, their government, and also later on, near the end of their time there, they had allowed the Presbyterians to come in and build a school. Basically, they were interested in education, and so they allowed the Presbyterians to come in. And they were fairly prosperous there in Arkansas. In Indian Territory, when they got into Indian Territory in 1828, they signed a treaty giving up that land in Arkansas and moving into what is now known as Oklahoma. And this map here shows the Oklahoma Territory and the land that they were given. It stretched all the way across Oklahoma to the Panhandle, and that was as far as the United States territory extended at that time. They were the first Cherokees into Oklahoma, and so they acquired the name the Old Settlers. Now, the East, I'm not going to go very much into the Eastern Immigrants, or the last group of Cherokees that came into Indian Territory over the Trail of Tears. I think most people know the story of the Trail of Tears. The Eastern Immigrants came, though, in 1838-39 and joined the Old Settlers, or Western Cherokees, who were already there. And immediately, John Ross, who was the chief of the Eastern Immigrants, began to push for the Act of Union. And that was something that was really not welcomed by the Old Settlers, because they already had their government set up, and they welcomed the people there. They said, welcome to our land. We have room for everybody. So they were welcomed, and then John Ross began to push for the Act of Union, which they did sign. Sequoyah was one of the Western Cherokees who signed that document, and also the acting chief of the Old Settlers signed it, but there were many who were still not satisfied with it. It was really it caused a lot of contention between the two groups. However, the unified government lasted until about the time of the Civil War. The Keetoowahs were always very forward-looking people. In 1858, just prior to the beginning of the Civil War, they met at Bug Tucker Spring near Tahlequah, and they talked about the Civil War and the war between the states, and how there was going to be war and what was going to be their part and how they were going to respond, what they were going to do. They had feared that their people were going to be torn apart and families were going to be torn apart during that war, because they had always been dragged into European American wars that happened. So they created a constitution that they felt would help them to hold the Keetoowah people together. And Bud Gritz was the one who was appointed to write that constitution. He wrote it, and it was approved in all of the Keetoowah, they called them lodges back then. All of the Keetoowah lodges voted, and they approved the Constitution in 1859. And so they expressed their idea that they wanted to be neutral in during the wartime. They didn't want to fight for either side. They wanted to just protect their homeland. Chief John Ross at that time was also wanting to be neutral, and so they kind of backed him previous to the Civil War. But then in August of 1861, the Cherokees voted to throw in with the Confederacy, and that was something that the Keetoowahs did not want to happen, and so they took the opposite side. As soon as they could, they began to desert the South and go to the North. Although they were mustered into the Confederacy, the Keetoowahs began to desert almost immediately. And they were under the command of John Drew. He had around 1,200 Keetoowahs that were under his command. And eventually, there were only about 60 of them that left in his command, that were left. And then, this is one of my great-great-great-grandfathers, is Captain James Vann. I had to throw him in here. He was a captain for the Union. he was mustered into the Confederacy, but the same month he was mustered into the Confederacy, he deserted and went to the north. He became the commander of the Company E, Kansas 3rd Indian Home Guard. Lieutenant Colonel Lewis Downing also was a Keetoowah member. He was a Baptist minister. He was a chaplain for the Confederacy until July of 1862, when he decided that he also would desert and go to the north. He led about 200 of his people into Kansas, and they joined up with the 2nd Kansas Indian Home Guard. He also, later after the war, became the chief of the Cherokee Nation, because he was able to kind of bring the two sides together, and again, they were able to kind of function even though they had been on different sides during the war. The Keetoowahs were awarded a flag, which we have at the museum, after the Civil War for their faithful service to the Union during the war between the states. The current government. Are the Keetoowahs part of the Cherokee Nation? No, we are not part of the Cherokee Nation. At one time, at various times, we're kind of part of the Cherokee Nation, then we're not part of the Cherokee Nation, then we're part of the Cherokee Nation. So at this present time, no, we are not part of the Cherokee Nation. The Curtis Act of 1898 effectively abolished the government of the Cherokee Nation, and that was just before Oklahoma statehood. They were trying to abolish all the tribes, governments of all the tribes in Oklahoma, so they could have statehood. And of course, oil was discovered back in the 1890s in Oklahoma, and so that kind of sped up the process of taking away the governments of the Indians in Oklahoma, or in Indian Territory. During the allotment period, the Curtis Act abolished or terminated effectively the governments, and then they wanted to allot the land separately to each individual. They received a plot of land during that time. And the Keetoowah leaders said, no, don't do that. Don't vote for it. Don't take your allotment. And the Keetoowah people refused to accept their allotments. There were newspaper articles published at that time explaining the Keetoowah position about not enrolling, not accepting allotments. And the U.S. government decided, yes, they were going to accept their allotments. Whether they wanted to or not, they would accept them. And so they sent the military out from Fort Gibson to round up the Keetoowah leaders and put them in jail and force them to accept their allotments. So eventually they did accept their allotments, although it was never what they wanted. They wanted to hold their land in common like they had always done, but that was not what the government wanted. The Cherokee Nation was to be terminated by March of 1906. The Keetoowahs went to the federal court in 1905, and they were awarded certificate of incorporation. And what that did for them was it gave them the right to have standing in courts, because they knew that when the land was gone and it was allotted to everybody had their separate piece of land, that there would still be times when people would try to take it away from them. So they fought in the courts for the Cherokee people during that time. And the Keetoowahs were the only ones that were authorized to do that, not the Cherokee Nation. Later on during the Great Depression, there was a move to allow the Indian tribes to again organize their governments. And the Keetoowahs began immediately in 1934 when they passed the Indian Reorganization Act. They began to reorganize their government. They were told at that time that there would be another bill coming across that would meet the needs of the Oklahoma Indian tribes, since there were no reservations. The IRA was basically for reservation tribes. The Oklahoma Indian Welfare Act was written and passed, and the Keetoowahs sought recognition under that, and they did receive their recognition in 1946. Their government documents were approved in 1950, and we became the only governmental entity in Oklahoma for Cherokees. And why are there two Cherokee tribes? Well, during the reorganization period, the Keetoowahs were the ones who organized. It was not foreseen that Cherokee Nation would ever be reorganized. They would never have another government, that the government would be a new government. And so the Keetoowahs had to prove that they had at times acted as a government, which they did during the Civil War because they took the opposite side, they had their constitution. And also after allotment, they had their certificate of incorporation where they represented the people on their land issues. And so they were approved to organize under those statutes. The Cherokee Nation never sought to reorganize at that time. And they did gain the right in 1970, October 22nd, 1970, they got a law passed in Congress that said they were allowed to select their chief. It does not say elect, it says select. And that was in 1970. And then in 1976, they got a new constitution and they began their reorganization. The Keetoowah flag, on our flag at the bottom there, you'll see written in Cherokee, Anikaduwagi, Aniyunwiya. That means we are the people of Keetoowah. We are the real people. And that's all I have. Are there any questions?
On that flag, how did the traditional Roman characters work together with the other, I guess, like Slavic characters? What are some of the right?
Well, the original syllable that Sequoyah developed was far different from this. And it was more ornate. And back when they began printing the Cherokee Newspaper, they adapted some of the Roman characters for those characters that Sequoyah had created. And that was because they were harder to create in the hot molded type that they used back in those days. And so they simplified it. And this is why we have wound up with these Roman characters. They were definitely outnumbered, yes. Yes, and that basically is the reason why the Eastern immigrants wound up being the leaders in the government. Okay, any other questions? Yes?
So if that happened back in the Eastern Reservation, and we're now almost to the Reservation, what's happening down the road? What's happening to these slave laborers and still guards? On the Western Plains side.
What's happening to them? Well, most of them are members of the United Keetoowah Band. And there's some that are Cherokee, of course, because there's a mixture there of the old settler. Eventually, there was a mixture, the old settlers, with the Cherokee Nation who came later. And the United Keetoowah Band still represents those Cherokees who are more traditional. And hopefully we will get our full rights. We don't have those yet. But hopefully we will, at some time in the future, get our rights. Oh, yes. The United Keetoowah Band is a fully recognized Indian tribe, just like the Cherokee Nation or the Eastern Band. We are fully recognized by the Congress of the United States as a band of Cherokees, and we have our own government. We have some programs at this time, but we don't have casino money. We did have casino money, but we don't now. Our casino is shut down. Any other questions? Anybody? The Van Ancestry? Yes, it does. My great-great-great-grandfather, who was in the Civil War, he was descended from the Van in Georgia, yes. Okay, any other?
Can you elaborate a little bit on how there used to be casinos and there aren't now?
There used to be what? I'm sorry.
So there used to be casinos, so what happened?
Well, that's kind of a long story, but I'll try to give you the short version. The United Keetoowah Band wanted to have money to help the people. And so in 1986, we bought a little place where we had bingo, paper bingo. And we ran that for a period of time, 10, 15 years. And then we got the slot machine type. Is it class 2? Slot machines. But we have a problem. I guess I could just go ahead and say it. We have a problem with the Cherokee Nation. They don't want us to have anything. They are huge. They claim over 300,000 members. And we are small. We're small. We're poor. We're traditional. We have around 13,000 members. They have 300,000. And so they have a lot more political power than we do. And so they're able to get a lot more have a lot more influence with congressmen and the government of the United States. I mean, that's just the truth. And so we didn't really have a license for our casino. And we started out so small and so before everybody else. We had the casino there, or the bingo hall we called it, a long time before the Cherokee Nation had their casinos, which they have about 8 or 9 of them now. And they make multiplied millions of dollars. And we were doing all right for a long time, as long as we had that money coming in. But now we don't have it coming in. So we are still trying to develop businesses. We have a board who's trying to develop businesses for the Keetoowahs because we haven't been able to get our casino going again. And our chief agreed that if we didn't have the land and trust, what it takes is land and trust to have your casino. But we got our little bingo place there before the regulations, 86, and then I think it's 88 when they had the regulations in. So we preceded the regulations by 2 years, and I think that's just my opinion. I'm not a lawyer, but I think the reason we were able to operate, which we operated for 27 years there, was because that we did precede the regulations. They call them IGRA. I'm not sure what that stands for, but anyway, it's the regulations. We preceded those, and so the state of Oklahoma didn't try to shut us down or anything. We were just there for 27 years. And then finally, we got the word that we were going to get the land in trust. And so we agreed that if we didn't have, I didn't agree, which I didn't agree with it at all, but our chief agreed that they would shut the casino down if we didn't have the land in trust by August the 30th. And so they had signed the trust land and everything, and then immediately Cherokee Nation filed a lawsuit against us to stop the land in trust. So we couldn't have the land in trust. And so then they went ahead and shut it down because we didn't have the land in trust by August 30th. So they shut it down. That's been almost 3 years ago. So we've had a lot of difficulties since then. I might as well just tell you the whole story. We've had a lot of difficulty with our people because we were using our money for education for our young people for college. We were using our money for human services. And now we have very little human services. We get just a little bit from the BIA, but it's not near enough to really help. And we have no money for education. Cherokee Nation gets our education money. So we are pretty much bound and tied right now. And the court hasn't made any decisions. So that's where we are. That's where we are right now. Okay, any other questions? Yes. Our requirements for membership? Our requirements for membership are that you have to be at least 1/4 Cherokee blood. At one time, you had to be a full blood. Back in the 1880s, 90s, even on into the 1900s, you had to be a full blood in order to be a member of the Keetoowah Band. But now it's you have to have proof of descendancy from the Keetoowah roll or from the Dawes roll. Cherokee Nation uses the Dawes roll, which is not a tribal roll. It's a secretarial roll that was made by the U.S. government for the purposes of allotment, and they use that roll to go back and check for descendancy. And anybody who is descended from that roll can be a member of the Cherokee Nation. They have no blood quantum requirement at all. And so they have people who are less than 1,000th degree at this time. And so that's how, to my way of thinking, they're able to acquire 300,000 members. So it's kind of a touchy deal, you know, between the Cherokee Nation and the Keetoowahs, because we view ourselves as the Anikatuwagi Aniyuwiya. That means we're the real people. And so we would like to be able to serve our people and have our rights. That's all we want. I've heard the old people say, we want just what belongs to us. We don't want what belongs to them. We want what belongs to us. But we would like to be able to serve our own people. So far, that hasn't happened. So, are there any other questions? Okay, thank you very much for coming today. Appreciate your questions, and hope you enjoy the rest of the Cherokee Days. Thank you very much.